So again, thank you for having me. I feel honored to be here. I know it's even dinner time for most of you, and probably for a lot of you. You guys have coworkers that are probably 10 years and under, just kind of like my house. So it's a big time of the night for lots of you. So I thank you for being here and listening to Honeywell's story. We're always looking forward to meeting new people, expanding our ecosystem, gaining adoption, and really learning from all of you as well. So today, I just wanted to touch on what I would say isn't really a use case. And I think that's important in the world of blockchain technology, especially at the enterprise level, which is more of companies using blockchain. I think that in order for this to really move forward, we have to move past use cases. And while doing use cases is really important, figuring out how we really integrate blockchain technology in what we do every day is really going to be key to making sure that the adoption rates go up at the enterprise level. And so feel free to ask questions, but I just want to kind of take you through, how we use it every day. So why is blockchain technology so valuable? I think it's funny because if you ask a person what blockchain is to them, everyone will give you a different answer. And I think so I always like, coming out with what my definition of blockchain is. And I always explain it as it's just a digital ledger. It's just a digital ledger that can be crowdsourced in a highly secure way. And then why is that so valuable? Well, when it comes to enterprises, whether you're a mom and pop all the way up to a multi-billion-dollar company like a Honeywell, we don't have this shared data pool approach to anything really. In fact, if you look at all Fortune 100 companies, I would say that a lot of them have strategies where monetizing your data is like the big strategy going forward. And so this concept of sharing data and not having this walled garden approach, it's something that we are really scared of. We like to protect our data because we feel like, one, it's important, it's valuable, and we can make money off of it. And so blockchain technology is really a paradigm shift. It's a way in which we can crowdsource valuable data sets. So I put two examples here. One is part pedigree data. So Honeywell, I don't know how familiar you are with Honeywell, but I work in the aerospace industry. And serialized parts, and you can think about automotive parts, serialized parts is a big, big industry where we're trying to figure out how to really track and trace these serialized parts. I would say that automotive versus aerospace is different slightly, in that aerospace, these serialized parts are worth a lot of money. I mean, the average order that goes through GoDirect Trade, which is a marketplace that I run, it's used aerospace parts. Our average order is about $10,000. And we sell multi-million-dollar parts that are used on our marketplace. So if you think about, how important it is to really keep track of where these parts have been, like previous owners, things like that. And I'll go more into kind of what we've done with it. It's a big deal. Carbon emission usage as well. I think that's a really good use case for, you really need all utility companies to provide that usage data in order for a household, a company, a city to calculate that CO2 usage. So it always comes back to blockchain having, it's the technology where it is a digital ledger, but you can crowdsource it. So if the data collectively get it from multiple sources, and you need it from multiple sources, just like part pedigree data for a used aerospace part. It's not just Honeywell touching those parts. Blockchain technology can become very powerful. And so I know that you guys are already very familiar with blockchain, but of course, these are some of the facets that are obviously very attractive and why it's a technology that people are really starting to look at and take seriously. I always like showing this slide. It was taken off of a TED Talk, and so it's not our slide, but it's interesting because I really believe that blockchain technology is similar to what the internet was, 40 years ago. 40 years ago, just a few dozen computers connected together with the internet. And I think blockchain is the same. So I think a lot of people believe that blockchain technology, they think so much about cryptocurrency and that mode of using blockchain. But when it comes to blockchain technology being used at like a company level and enterprise level, like at a Honeywell, especially within aerospace, we are like at the ground floor. It's considered to me an infantile technology. It might be a little bit more mature in the financial services sector, maybe even like the food industry, you can make that argument. But in reality, I think it's widely misunderstood. A lot of people really don't, understand how it brings value. And they may oversimplify it or they may undersimplify it. So I think there's a lot of things going, but I do think that it could become a technology that is truly a game changer. It just happens to be that at this point in time, right now, we're at the ground floor with it, especially within aerospace. So in the introduction, again, I'm Lisa Butters, and I am the general manager of GoDirect Trade. And what is GoDirect Trade? So you guys can all go there today, www.godirecttrade.com, and it is a marketplace. It's a marketplace where we sell used and new aerospace parts. So why did Honeywell get in the business of having a marketplace? Well, what's really interesting about this particular industry is the used parts market for aerospace is about $4 billion a year, and almost none of it is done online. So believe it or not, this is one of the few industries left where most everything is done via email and phone call, which is insane if you think about how much money runs through this industry to do everything manually through quoting process, through faxes and emails and things like that. But that's really where we are today with used aerospace parts. So Honeywell, we wanted to solve that really big customer problem. No one is transacting online for used aerospace parts, and we wanted to build a marketplace. So our marketplace is effectively a combination between Etsy, if you're familiar with Etsy, and Amazon. We say it's like an Amazon in that it's a really easy to use customer experience. We say it's like an Etsy because you can build your own customized storefront. It takes about 3 easy steps, and it's less than 5 minutes to build your own storefront, which is significant within aerospace because you could have mom and pop shops all the way up to multi-billion-dollar enterprises. So Honeywell has a storefront inside GoDirect Trade. Boeing has a storefront inside GoDirect Trade, and it literally takes 5 minutes to set up a storefront. So for many of these companies inside of aerospace, they have absolutely zero e-commerce experience, and GoDirect Trade really transforms that, changes all of that, and allows anybody to really start to partake in e-commerce. So when you talk about blockchain technology, GoDirect Trade is a marketplace that really is foundationally built off of blockchain technology. And what we do is we try to collect as much information as we can about a serialized part so that we can bring it to the consumer for free. Because if you think about when airlines or whoever it is that's buying these used parts, the more transparency you can give to them about the part, the better. And remember, this industry, nothing is done online. So this is very transformative in this particular industry. We show price, product images, quality documents, and now we're trying to show part pedigree data. Very similar to Carfax. If you've ever used Carfax to purchase a used automobile, you want to know for that car, previous owners, has it been in an accident? Maybe it was purchased in a cold weather state and you don't want to buy something, that was always in the snow. We do the same exact thing with blockchain technology, but for aerospace parts. So we are trying to build up a part pedigree, so to speak, that's tied to these parts, and we try to build out this ecosystem. So as from a seller perspective, the listing event, if the seller has repair information as to where that part was repaired out of, we will try to collect that. Dismantlers, if you wonder where all the parts come from in aerospace, they're either secondhand, like they come off of aircraft, or aircraft, they are retired. We have, a ton of aircraft retirements happening right now because of COVID-19. Those aircraft are disassembled and those parts fled back into the aftermarket. Anything sold on GoDirect Trade, we capture that as a bill of sale event. But our real goal here with blockchain technology and a Honeywell perspective is to continue to build out the ecosystem. So again, if Honeywell is the only person that's putting data into this ecosystem or this blockchain, then that doesn't really help us, because on GoDirect Trade, we have a ton of parts. They're not just Honeywell parts. And on top of that, even Honeywell parts that Honeywell manufactures and sells, we're not always the ones that repair all the parts. We're not always the ones that sell all the parts. And so we want that information to build up that part pedigree. It's touched by multiple parties, which again, it goes back to why blockchain technology is so important. Because it's not just Honeywell that's trying to populate the data, you're looking for other people to populate the data. Blockchain technology allows us to get that data in a highly secure way from the other parties. So in this case, you look at this part, and what we want to do is manifest the blockchain activity to the consumer, so that the consumer, say they're looking at this valve, and there's another seller that's selling the same exact part number. if your part has more information, you know, a better on-chain kind of part pedigree, the odds of that part selling are far higher. And think about it, if you had two Toyota Corollas next to each other, they're both used. One, you know, you have a good Carfax history on, you know, a previous owner, you know, maybe it was taken to a certified repair shop. And the other one you just absolutely have no idea about, but it's still a Toyota Corolla. Chances are that buyer, the consumer, is going to feel far more comfortable paying for something where there's trace, where there's information about that part. And that's really what we're trying to do within the marketplace. We're trying to leverage the blockchain data and we're trying to show it to the consumer. Okay, I guess we can wait for questions at the end, but I wanted to show you kind of the end state as to how we use this data, right? It's most important, I think you can collect data all day long from a blockchain perspective within your ecosystem. But if you're not really using the data, then, and it doesn't bring any value, you can't build services on top, then it really does you no good. And so that's my purpose in really showing you our GoDirect Trade marketplace, was to say, hey, this whole concept of trying to build a part pedigree platform for serialized parts in the aerospace industry, which can really transpire to other industries such as automotive, electronics, all kinds of things, you know, even pets or, you know, animals, you think about that. But for us, the marketplace built like a service on top of the part pedigree, and that data is very valuable to us. Part pedigree is valuable because it adds more value to the part. It allows consumers to make better decisions. And so I think that's, you know, when we think about use cases for blockchain technology and, you know, what use cases to pursue or what applications to build, you really need to stop and ask yourself, like, what value is it bringing? You know, what services could you actually build on top that people would actually care about? So you saw the marketplace and you saw how we use the blockchain data. What I also want to show you is Honeywell's commitment and what we've done within our systems to really integrate all of our daily production and repair activities on-chain or onto our ledger. So a little bit of background about Honeywell. Honeywell, it's a really large company. We're about a $40 billion a year company, really big. We play in multiple industries, including aerospace. Now, within aerospace, we happen to be an OEM. That's an original equipment manufacturer. So we actually manufacture brand new parts in our factories. Another one of our, you know, it's probably our most profitable part of our aerospace sector is our repair business. So we sell new parts, but we also have over 50 repair shops across the world where we are repairing constantly these aerospace parts and giving them back to airlines, to operators, to end users to reinstall back into their aircraft. I think one thing that's important just to note for aerospace is the aftermarket or the used kind of part industry is very alive and well within aerospace. So if you think about cars, you have a Toyota Corolla and you have an engine. And, you know, maybe your engine goes bad and so you rebuild a new engine. You know, you really probably don't get a ton of life over and over again from automotive parts. You can kind of rebuild the mechanical parts. But in aerospace, the average number of times that an aerospace part changes hands, like owners, is 4. So one question that really, you know, brings us home is how long does an aerospace, you know, an aircraft engine last? And the answer is forever. If you just continue to rebuild the engine and you recertify it over and over and over again, you could really effectively have an engine that lasts forever. And so if you think about just the repair cycle and processes within aerospace, it's really important to start collecting this data. Aerospace parts, they get repaired often, and you don't just scrap them all the time. They go back into an aircraft and they come off the aircraft. They get repaired again, they go back into the aircraft and they come off. And so this whole concept of a part pedigree, there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of hands that touch an aerospace part in its lifetime. So Honeywell, we have over 100 either OEM or repair factories in the world. And what's really cool is we have SAP. So SAP is an ERP system, multiple ERP systems out there. Honeywell happens to have the luxury where, you know, we made that decision like 15 plus years ago where we said, we want one ERP system to manage across all the sites. And, you know, what's interesting about that is, you know, it obviously makes things a lot easier, but, you know, fast forward 15 years, we never realized how transformative it would be in terms of having a blockchain ledger. Because what we did is we took our SAP ERP system and we fully integrated it into our Honeywell blockchain. So what does that mean? That means that as important events happen for parts within our integrated supply chain, if we manufacture a part, so every 2 seconds or every second we manufacture 2 parts, we record that digital birth event on our ledger. It's for sale to a customer, we record that on the ledger. Every time we repair a unit, we record it to the ledger. One thing that just went live, literally just last week, which is a really, really big deal, at least to Honeywell, and in terms of trying to set the stage within aerospace and drive adoption of blockchain technology, is every time we repair a unit or a part in our repair factory, there are these things called airworthiness tags or documents that go along with the repair. And it's kind of like a certificate, so to speak, but it literally is like a piece of paper that's a PDF. And if you, like all repair shops in the world, they generate these types of documents. So it's a very paper intensive industry. What's really cool is Honeywell is the only repair shop on the planet where all of these digital certificates or airworthiness documents, we still generate the PDF for the FAA, but we also take all those data form elements, and when they're created in our system in SAP, we take the data elements and we actually extract those and put them on chain. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to build this Google-esque, I would say, user interface where we have this part pedigree platform that is anything and everything aerospace parts. So if you really translate to what we're trying to do here, we're trying to collect everything there is to know about these parts: images, quality documents, event data like birth data, scrap data, repair data, sale data, things like that, so that if somebody puts in a serialized part, like a part number or a serial number or an aircraft serial number, we can try to push to them collectively everything we know about these parts. And what's really cool about the airworthiness tag information that we get is when I say that we take the kind of like the quality tag information, I'm not trying to store the PDF on chain. I'm not trying to make our ledger a content server. What we're really trying to do is take the data form elements from those airworthiness tags, put them on chain so that if you go into this, our user interface where you're trying to just figure out more about a part, it will reconstruct all of the quality documents that are tied to that part, that serial number, that aircraft serial number. So we're trying to not give you the certified copy, but we're trying to say, hey, if you're searching for a serialized part, we can say, okay, here's what the 8130 tag, that's kind of like the airworthiness document. This is what the airworthiness tag looks like. It came out of this repair shop. And if you want the certified copy, you can click here and then it will go to the URL if you're the owner of the document and show you the original copy. So it's just, what we're trying to do is really integrate our ERP system so that, the big events, tags like airworthiness and quality tags, all of the data is getting sent on chain so that it will eventually build up this part pedigree platform that, applications such as GoDirect Trade as a marketplace, we can build a service on top to extract and use that data. One other application that I want to show you, and this one is more of like a trial that we're continuing to do trials to really figure out how we integrate this into our integrated supply chain processes. So in the upper right-hand corner is a $100 bill. And there's, for those of you who are familiar with kind of the anti-counterfeit measures on the $100 bill, there's about 5 factors that we know of. It's like, magic ink, there's a 3D, there's a translucent stamp on it. There's all kinds of things on the $100 bill that try to combat, counterfeit activities. So what we want to do within our supply chain process is we wanted to apply the same kind of physical factor authentication while using blockchain technology, but on aerospace parts. And so why did we even start this particular trial? For those of you who have looked at blockchain technologies and counterfeit kind of technologies, what's interesting is a lot of people think that blockchain technology in and of itself is a good anti-counterfeit measure, which is not true at all. Because really at the crux of it, blockchain is really just a secure digital ledger. It doesn't do anything more than that. But if you combine blockchain technologies with certain anti-counterfeit technologies, you can really have a powerful, powerful technology at your disposal. So what we did is we worked with 2 startup companies. One is called iTrace, the other one is called Secure Marking. And you can count a third because Honeywell also has a magic ink of its own that we used. But iTrace provides kind of this unhackable QR code that we stamped onto a physical ID plate that's on the aerospace part. Secure Marking is a startup that has magic ink. And basically you rub the magic ink on top of the ID plate, like on that QR code, so to speak, that iTrace manufactures or produces. And it's only visible under certain frequencies of light. And so from a anti-counterfeit perspective, you have two things. You have the magic ink, so you need a special light to prove out that if you can see it under certain frequencies, then it has a magic ink, which is a symbol of, the authenticity of the Honeywell part. And the second thing is that QR code that iTrace produces, that patented QR code. It's like a QR code on steroids. It's bad to even call it a QR code because it's really not. But that is a code that you scan with a mobile app and authenticates. So it proves out that it also is an authentic Honeywell part. So that once you scan it, it actually registers to our blockchain ledger forever. So it kind of stores like that digital birth certificate. And because that marking stays with that aerospace part, when that aerospace part moves on, from the factory, to maybe the airline that's going to install it onto their aircraft, when the airline receives it, they're going to scan it, and then it's going to register on our ledger as, okay, Delta Airlines, they received this part, they're going to install it on this aircraft on this date. And so you always have that physical marking with the part. So just if you want to visualize it, you think about a part and all the stops that it's going to make, because that iTrace code follows that part physically, and so does that magic ink. Just like a $100 bill, that authenticity, those two factors will always follow that part for the life of the part. Other things I want to show above really quick is this on the left-hand side of this slide, it says a starter BOM, which is a starter bill of materials. So what we're trying to look at now, and this is why I really consider this more of like a trial learning, because we want to figure out where, how, at what frequency do we really put this type of technology into our supply chain. So when we ran this trial, it was on a starter that actually goes into an engine. But now what we're trying to do is we're trying to move to the left side of the bill of materials. And so within this starter is the seal, the ring, the bearing ball, the gear shaft, the clutch. And we need to figure out, these raw materials and these things that go into the end outline, do we need to physically mark the part? Can we physically mark the part? Do we need to physically just mark maybe the tamper-proof packaging? So these are all things that, even industries like the food industry, and the pharmaceutical industry, we all have a similar problem in terms of how deep in the bill of materials do you go? Do you go into the bill of materials? What do you actually mark? What are the important things when you're really trying to figure out tracking and tracing of parts? So if you have end outlines, you should probably do track and trace on those. But when it comes to going into the bill of materials, the question for all of us is really how deep do you really go into that bill of material? And that's really it. We have other applications that we're currently working and testing on. And I think that as the months go on and we get more mature with those, then we'd love to, share those as time goes on. But that's basically it. I don't know if you guys have any questions or.
I'll unmute in just a moment, actually. Lisa, we probably are going to end up having to re-unmute ourselves when I press this button. I've noticed it before, so I'll just do that now. Oh, actually, we're fine. Actually, to start off, I actually have a question with regards to the iTrace stuff. It sounds pretty interesting, the way that you guys are going about it. I'd imagine, again, separating the documents from the chain and the anti-counterfeit solution, it is an interesting way to address, I guess, the information size factor as the blockchain grows. And just to make sure I understand correctly, the iTrace data for each document is stored on block?
Yes, it is. So they have their own ledger as well, but we have interconnectivity, just like it's kind of like that chain of chains effect.
Mm-hmm.
Is important when it comes to blockchain technology because you're not going to be the only one with a ledger. So iTrace has its own ledger and we connect to them and they connect to us.
That's an interesting way of doing it. In terms of parts trace, how is that, how has it grown to this point, or how is it expected to grow over time? And given the stuff that's implemented already, are there any unforeseen challenges as data might grow?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to just parts tracing in general, Honeywell has thousands upon thousands of part numbers. I think we have like 1 million part numbers in our whole ERP system, but we don't manufacture them all anymore. But you have to really think, do you have to really physically mark and trace every part? I mean, one day it might happen, right? But in these early stages of blockchain technology, I think the hurdles that you really run into is you can't do everything at once. So for example, especially within aerospace, which is a heavily regulated industry, that starter in the middle, for us to change the ID plate, for us to put that marking on there and use the magic ink, that requires an engineering change. And we have thousands of these parts. So to do an engineering change on all of these seems like it's a lot of work, but at the same time, if we really are going to invest and say Honeywell is going to track and trace on all of their parts and set that precedence, then doing all those engineering changes, it wouldn't be unprecedented, but it's still as far as like hurdles and challenges go, it's a big investment, right? And so especially when you're starting out, the challenge is figuring out which parts should we strategically mark. I think for us, there are certain product lines such as the Leap starter that goes into the 737 MAX. There are certain parts that we strategically want to start with because we feel like adding kind of like this traceability, it adds value to the part that we feel like our customers would really want.
That's awesome. Thank you. We have a question from Armando. It's in the chat. And I'll read it here. How decentralized is the platform you are using? How many nodes does it have? And who are the participants?
Yeah, so we use Hyperledger Fabric, and our ecosystem is really built on having people input data into the system. And so we have a lot of, let me pull up this ecosystem. So for example, on the marketplace today, whenever a seller lists product or bill of sale event occurs, those are all automated events that as soon as they happen on the marketplace, we write those events to be on chain. We also have a user interface that people can log into that if they're part of our ecosystem, and they can, like for example, a repair shop or a channel partner or a seller, if they have repair events that they know about the part, they can use the user interface to load in repair events. So as far as nodes go, we only have connection to 3 separate nodes today. One of them is an OEM, one is a dismantler, like an aircraft dismantler, and one is a repair shop. And those are all like distinct nodes where what we were really trying to do was test out, can we have interconnectivity with other nodes outside of the Honeywell firewall, and can we all share data, and can this all work? So right now our ecosystem, it's small in that we don't have a ton of nodes on. I think that lends itself to aerospace being so infantile with the technology. But I do think as time goes on, as more and more big players, and we're talking like aircraft OEMs, tier 1 component OEMs, which is like a Honeywell, right? Other tier 1 component OEMs would be like a Parker, a Rolls-Royce, a GE, a Hamilton, things like that. I think as adoption really rises with the bigger players, you'll see more and more, connectivity, the chain of chains type effect with connecting nodes together. But right now, aerospace it's very infantile. And really what we should all be working on within aerospace is how to drive adoption, because you don't have enough enterprises that really want to invest in the technology, and they really want to share their data and share a database, the same digital ledger.
And that brings up an interesting point. I mean, given that the industry has pretty much been used to dealing with parts in analog spaces, such as phone and just calling up places that they know, have there been any hurdles from the business perspective for people to get on board with the requirements and translating quality control guidelines, for lack of better, to a virtual marketplace?
Yeah, I think so besides even the stuff with the blockchain technology that we use, where we allow sellers to upload kind of like part history so that we can show consumers, the marketplace itself, blockchain aside, we are the only marketplace within aerospace that requires price, product images, and quality documents for each listing. There's no other marketplace on earth for aerospace that requires those 3 things. And so you would think that, when the marketplace went live about 1.5 years ago, that you would have sellers like beating down the door trying to use this technology, right? But that's not so. Like every seller that comes on GoDirect Trade, it's like a seller that we have to win over because they are just not used to e-commerce. It's very much like, you know, in the 1990s when Amazon started to come, you know, onto the scene. You had a lot of brick and mortars, a lot of sellers that really just didn't buy into the concept of e-commerce. They didn't like all that transparency and they really liked doing things the old way. Soon though, you know, you get this snowball of, you know, FOMO. And if you don't do it, you know, you're just going to get left behind, which you can see a lot of brick and mortars that did that. Right now with GoDirect Trade, we're in this, the phase where sellers are still not convinced that this industry is going to move online, which I am positive that this industry eventually will move online. All of them will. And so for us, I think it's, you know, the challenge is convincing them to be more transparent, whether it's price, product images, paperwork, or blockchain, which in, you know, in all, you know, in its most truest sense of technology, it really is a technology to bring more trust to the transaction, right? To bring more transparency to the transaction. And I think that in this industry, they're not used to that yet. And, you know, the real game changer is that the buyer doesn't have that expectation in the transaction where they expect price, product images, you know, history on the part before they purchase it. Once we change that buyer kind of perception and expectation, which is our expectation when we buy on Amazon today, right? As a consumer, if you didn't have price or a picture, you would say, okay, this is totally a scam and I'm not going to buy anything from you. I think that in this particular industry, once we have the paradigm shift with the buyer, where they will no longer buy parts unless they have certain things that are transparent, like price, trace, things like that. E-commerce will become king in this space, which it's not now, but eventually it will.
And that's an interesting point. I think I mentioned this before in our correspondence, Lisa. When it comes to, at least in my experience in the airline industry, time definitely matters. And sometimes if there's an aircraft flight delay that has to do with something requiring maintenance or aircraft servicing, they call it, they have to order a part. And then sometimes if they receive the part, they discover that it needs to be worked on a little bit further, which causes a further delay. So I think the value definitely would be there. I'd imagine that that's probably something that will really start to get people on board.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned timing. I've read a lot of interesting articles on just startups in general and really what has made or broken a startup, like what has been its kind of indicator for success. And one of the key indicators, I mean, amongst many factors, which could be like, you know, your team structure, the idea itself, funding, but the key factor is timing in terms of like startup viability. And, you know, if you look at the marketplace, blockchain technology, transparency, efficiency, you know, we really are banking on Generation Z. So I know millennials are already prevalent in the industry today. And we talk about millennials like they're these up and comers, but the majority of the workforce has now become millennials. But the next generation, like my kids' generation, Generation Z, that is the generation we're really banking on here in terms of GoDirect Trade really taking off. We believe that Generation Z, they're not going to put up with emails, phone calls, and faxes. Like, let's be completely honest. What they will expect is complete transparency, efficiency, and if something doesn't have history, they will not even spare it a second glance. And so timing for us is going to be key in terms of having this marketplace, this startup really survive.
It would definitely end up making the process a lot faster in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 questions here in the chat now, so we'll try to get through these. The first off is from TJ, and it's just simply, why fabric?
Say that last part again. It cut out just a little bit.
Oh, sorry. It was just.
Oh, I got it. Why fabric?
Yep.
Yeah. So for us, I think you see if a handful of enterprises really liking Hyperledger Fabric. For Honeywell, I can speak. We like the idea that with Hyperledger Fabric, you could build on multiple channels. So the way that we have our structured is, like, for example, GoDirect Trade and the part pedigree platform, we've built it on a specific channel. We have other applications that are running. So we have things like digital engine logbooks. We have things going on with like the CO2 and climate accounting. All of those things are built on different channels, which is really cool for us because it allows us to be really flexible with our development, the different things we're trying to test. And I would say the second thing that, plays in big, at least with a larger company or Honeywell, and especially within an industry that I believe is pretty, new or infantile. Hyperledger, they have a really good kind of infrastructure of learning, which normally I'm just really bad at stuff like that. But the community that, hyperledger.org has put into place with their special interest groups, with their forums, it's a really, really, really robust, effective way to kind of learn and work with others. So I think they have a really good infrastructure in place for learning, collaborating, and really moving the technology forward. So I've been really happy that we've chosen, Hyperledger in terms of Honeywell's participation in blockchain.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, TJ. Next one is from Ruari Hannafin. And his question is, are there any privacy considerations? For instance, some people might want the price not to be written on a shared ledger. Is that something that's a consideration within the space?
Yeah, so what we've done, I don't know if this is like right, wrong, or indifferent, but so keep in mind, so we have a permissions-based blockchain. So not everybody can see it, right? You have to be part of our ecosystem, part of our trusted partners to really look at the data, push data in, access the data, so on and so forth. So I'll just set it with that. The second thing I'll set up with is, remember, in the world of corporate America, like everyone is terrified to share their data because everyone believes their data is valuable and everyone believes that they can monetize it in some way, shape, or form. So having said that, if you're trying to have an industry and really drive adoption, if you want other people to play with you, if you really want to move the technology forward, you can't just come down with like this big hammer and say, you have to provide all of these data elements. We're capturing this information. And if you don't let us capture it, then you're going to be out of luck and you can't do it. If you did that, then Honeywell would be the only person using this ledger. And so, back to the original question of, price is really sensitive, right? And so what we've done is there are events where we don't capture that really sensitive data like price, but for the owner of the data, we will capture that data for them. That makes sense. So like, for example, in this pedigree ecosystem that we have, where you can go in and you can, put in a part and get like the quality documents and the images and things like that, we very well may store price as part of like that bill of sale transaction. But at the moment, there are certain key things that we don't publicly share on this permission-based blockchain. And we only do that because, you have really big players that now they have bill of sale transactions. And as of right this second, they're very scared of like showing information like that. So we're storing it in hopes that, when the time is right and when kind of like the internet, everyone was, fearful of privacy rights, but now it's kind of like every single thing is on the internet. I think eventually as the years go on, people will get a lot less hung up on that and we'll be able to share like some of the really sensitive things such as price. And really that's, thinking about it now, that's really the only like data element I can think of that people really are scared about. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much visible and you can see, but that's really a sensitive one.
That answer kind of relates to the first of Dave McKay's two questions. His first question is, how are companies handling their private keys? Are other companies comfortable with sharing all of their sales info with a possible competitor, which I'd imagine possibly even includes just a list of their inventory?
Yeah, so with this particular, with our marketplace, so that's why people are so, I would say sellers in general in used aerospace are so, I want to say scared, but they're so hesitant to post their inventory online with a price because they're just afraid that if they post price, someone's just going to undercut them. Mm-hmm. And so the solution that they've come up with is nobody posts price. But then the problem is that manifests itself into a really inefficient kind of industry, right? Where it's 15 years ago with used cars. Come to the dealership. I don't want to give you a price over the phone, right? The salesperson would say, I want you to come in, I want you to put your hands on the car and let's negotiate a price. Super inefficient. But that's really how that industry was 15 years ago. Now, if you look at used cars, everything is transparent. I mean, you could buy a used car from a vending machine with Carvana at this point, but everything is transparent. And so I think that, you know, that question where it says sellers are afraid to really post price, right? Because they consider that, not only do they consider that sensitive information, but a lot of them consider that as like their like data intel, that it's a market-based price that they were able to build up based off of their knowledge of the market, and someone else is going to get that price and use it or undercut them by just a few bucks. And so I think that the problem though is when people are so sensitive with data such as pricing, it just makes for a really inefficient market. And I do believe that like 3 years from now, everyone's going to post price and we won't even be having this conversation anymore about competitors, pricing, arbitrage, things like that.
So would you say it's just more of a perception approach rather than something that that might actually be more or less, yes, that's sensitive info that might actually.
I think it is. Like for used aerospace parts, I really think it is a perception approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think eventually it will all be transparent, just exactly how used cars were 15 years ago.
Yeah, it sounds very similar. His second question is your chain code the companies need to depend on made available for review on a platform like GitHub?
I don't believe so, but I will take that question back to our team. But ours is private and it's permissions based, so I do not believe that that the code base is visible to the public.
Next question from TJ. In terms of operations, does Honeywell manage the network themselves or leverage IBM's blockchain platform?
We manage our network ourselves. And we do all of our development in-house as well.
Okay. I'm just trying to see if I actually might have missed some questions at the top. I don't think so. Folks, your mics are also unmuted, so if you'd like to ask some questions out in person, feel free to go ahead. We are closing near the end of the presentation time, so I'll give a few seconds to allow for that if anyone wanted to voice a question. Okay. Maybe one more, and I don't know if this one can be answered very quickly, but for certain parts that might need refurbishing, can those be listed or is there a minimum standard? And how is the condition documented in the ledger, especially with third parties?
Oh yeah. No, from an aerospace perspective, there's multiple conditions that you can list. For example, new, overhauled, repaired. You can also list parts as like overhauled with the lead time, for example. So pretend, you know, you had like a car, an automotive repair shop, and you had 10 Corolla engines on the shelf. And you don't necessarily want to repair all 10 of those Corolla engines and make them all overhauled at the same time. Maybe you just want to keep all 10 Corolla engines on the shelf in a repairable condition, so it still needs to be repaired. And then when you get a buyer for that engine, you're going to go and overhaul it for them. So on GoDirect Trade, you can have a unit that we call it as removed. So it's as removed, it needs to be repaired or overhauled, but we set a lead time or we allow the seller to say, okay, we can overhaul this within 30 days. And so if you think about it from a seller perspective, it enables them to not have to, you know, take all of their parts and bring them to like a gold standard. And they'll bring it to a gold standard or into a repaired standard, but only when they find a buyer for it.
Okay, Dave here, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got pretty excited when I saw this, and I went to your website, and you make some claims about what the blockchain does for you. But in going through here, it just seems like maybe you have like one small element, like your track and trace thing on a blockchain, and it's not properly decentralized. So it's really just, it's kind of like a maybe an expensive database. How do you kind of reconcile that?
Yeah, so we have, and it was mentioned before, but we have 4 different nodes where we're connected with an OEM, an aircraft dismantler, and a larger pair shop, so that those things, like their events, will come in through that node so it replicates. But within aerospace, this is a very infantile technology. And so what we're trying to do is work with larger aircraft OEMs and large tier 1 component OEMs like a Honeywell, like as big as a Honeywell, to figure out, okay, if you guys have a ledger as well, if you're on Hyperledger, if you're on a different technology, how do we connect together so that we can expand out this ecosystem? Because we're in an industry where this is not a prevalent technology that's being used everywhere, right? And so the only way that Honeywell knows how to increase the adoption in this industry is to do as much of it ourselves, right? Integrate it with our ERP system, integrate it with our marketplace, expand with, using an aircraft dismantler to set up a node, another OEM, right? Like these small hits and these small wins. But we will never get to the point where, we're going to have this expansive decentralized ecosystem until people start using the technology. And we are just not there yet with aerospace.
Okay.
Which is we're always so
you may
keen
want to
on
adjust
talking with others.
the claims that you make when you are referring to your system. You state a lot of things that the blockchain provides you, but it sounds like you're at just the beginning of a proof of concept. So as a practitioner in the blockchain space, I kind of run into this a lot, where someone will just tack on a blockchain and then claim all the benefits a blockchain gives them without having done the work. And it kind of hurts our industry a bit.
Oh, well, I'm sorry you think that, but honestly, our blockchain ledger itself, we have over 25 million transactions. And so we consider that very value add to our consumers, right? If we're able to provide a pretty rich history on some of these parts by obtaining the data from other sources, then we consider that a really big win, especially for our consumers.
You could actually do that just using a database. As a matter of fact, even the Magento platform you use would be able to support that.
So I think where we see the value with blockchain technology is enterprises don't want to just insert records into a Honeywell-owned database. What they want to do is they want to have their own ledger. They want to insert records into their own ledger, and then using the technology, we can share data across.
Right, and that's why you need to decentralize it. So if everyone runs their own nodes, and then they can set the confidentiality on their data, they would need to run their own private keys, which it doesn't sound like you're doing. And then that way they could keep their own data confidential as opposed to everything going through Honeywell, which seems to me like
but you're exactly right. I mean, but in order to do that, so I guess the point I'm trying to make is if people, especially enterprises, if we don't start to really move the technology forward, no enterprises will do this within aerospace, right? So we want to be decentralized and we want other nodes to expand, but at the same time, no one's going to expand the technology until people really start, like a Honeywell and like a Boeing and like a GE, until we really all stand up our own nodes. But a lot of people are waiting for big enterprises to do it before they'll really follow suit.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you did it where you shared the source code and stuff. So anyways, I think I've made my point.
Yeah, I think I agree with Lisa's last points there. If you look at tech adoption lifecycle, you need the innovators before the early adopters. So it's important for companies like Honeywell to actually take the risk and to try this out, because that actually benefits our ecosystem. Because now once people see that it works in production, 25 million transactions is very difficult to do, and once people see that works in production, they'll be very eager to now try this out, and that would mean we've crossed the chasm.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it really is. It's not that Honeywell wants to be the only node. I mean, we want all these big players, big and small, to participate in this decentralized ecosystem. But you will not get more nodes until people really start to buy into it. Otherwise, it's just going to be Honeywell. I can almost guarantee you that within aerospace. So that's why it's so important for us to always talk with others, show what we're doing in production, try to show a value in it so that we can get these big players to create nodes of their own, and so we can all have interconnectivity. But this is not just that Honeywell wants to be one player in it. We are trying very hard to get this to be a decentralized solution with other nodes. And it's going to be slow going until we get some of the big players, which is really on our plate for this year, like aircraft OEMs and the other large tier 1 component OEMs.
Great that we were able to address some of those points nearing the end here. We are at 7, so that unfortunately is time. If there's anything else, we will have the recording for this available online very shortly. And Lisa, I don't know if slides will end up being available, but if they are, we'll also post them at the Meetup page. If there's anything else or perhaps any questions you might want forwarded, feel free to give me a shout and I could forward them over to Lisa for you guys. Again, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And Lisa, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate all the questions, all the comments. Everything always makes us think about, what we can do, what we should consider. So I really appreciate everyone's comments.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you all. Take care.